There's no thrill like discovery. The Discovery Channel. Explore your world. In a Southeast Asian jungle, a rare glimpse of one of the most exotic and endangered species in the world. It's the Sumatran rhino, hunted by poachers to the brink of extinction. This rhino, named Torgamba, rescued by scientists from certain death, will be shipped halfway around the world and back, all in a last-ditch effort to avoid becoming the last rhino. In the early 1980s, on the island of Sumatra, this rhino, who was about 4 years old, lived in quiet obscurity until 1985, when fate opened up the outside world to him. A male rhino just reaching maturity, he was named after the rainforests of Torgamba, which his ancestors had wandered for countless generations before him. Back in 1985, no one could foresee that Torgamba would play such a critical role in the effort to save his species. After all, few humans had ever observed a Sumatran rhino outside a zoo. This is the most extensive footage ever shown of the secret of rhinos in their native habitat, thanks to special sanctuaries recently carved into the jungle in Indonesia and Malaysia for Torgamba and a select few of his companions. From the start, Torgamba's indomitable spirit inspired Tom Foos, the leader of the global effort to protect and save the Sumatran rhino.
Torgamba does represent a synopsis of the entire saga of the Sumatran rhino. He still is one of our best hopes for being able to propagate and preserve this species. So yes, I have a very special attachment for Torgamba.
While Sumatran tigers, monkeys, elephants, and other exotic creatures attracted most of the attention of conservationists, a small group of scientists knew the jungle harbored another extraordinary animal. One they knew little about.
Even among the rhinos, the Sumatran rhino, being more primitive, being a tropical forest species, there's a lot of knowledge that we need to acquire, and we don't have very much time.
Once, over 100 different rhino species roamed the world. Today, there are 5. 2 in Africa and 3 in Asia. A century ago, tens of thousands of Sumatran rhinos inhabited Southeast Asia, from India to the island of Borneo. Now, only an estimated 300 survive in the wild, on Peninsula Malaysia, Borneo, and Sumatra. The Sumatran rhino is called the hairy rhino because of its thick mat of reddish-brown hair. A relative of the woolly rhino, its ancestry reaches back to the last ice age, 15,000 years ago, which makes it one of the most primitive animals alive today. Stone Age hunters likely killed off the woolly rhino, and today's scientists were convinced history would repeat itself without intervention. An all too familiar reason for the decline in Sumatran rhinos is the destruction of the rainforest. Throughout Southeast Asia, millions of acres have been cleared to make way for a different species. And explosive growth in population triggered a mass exodus from the cities, turning the pristine forest into overcrowded suburbs. In other areas, settlers and logging companies cleared the forest to make way for farms and palm oil plantations. Major cash crops for the burgeoning population. For 22 years, Mohammed Khan was Malaysia's Director of Wildlife and National Parks. Today, as he surveys the Malaysian countryside, he nostalgically recalls the lush tropical forest that greeted him on his first visit in 1958.
This whole area was nothing but forest, swamp forest, plenty of water, and it's very difficult to walk. We need the land for what you call agriculture, and the forest here has been what you call cleared to make way for agriculture.
Despite the loss of habitat, there's still enough wilderness to support thousands of Sumatran rhinos. Some 40% of Malaysia remains forested. Nevertheless, throughout the rainforest, a growing network of logging roads has paved the way for an even more sinister threat. According to Khan, now chairman of the group working to preserve all 3 species of Asian rhinos.
It is one of the most endangered species of wildlife in the whole world. And the reason for the endangered status, I think, is the people kill these rhinos. Poachers are after the rhinos because of the high commercial value of the rhinoceros.
To be more specific, the threat is as plain as the 2 horns on Tergamba's face. The rhino uses his horn for pulling down branches to feed on leaves and for defense. These rhino horns fetch a premium on the black market. They're used in traditional Chinese medicines and for ceremonial dagger handles in the Middle East. At a rate of $25,000 a pound, in effect, there's a $50,000 bounty out on Tergamba on the black market.
This is a rhino rib bone, Sumatran rhino rib bone. This is a backbone, and this is a hoof. These are all found in the forest at the site of rhino kills.
Sumatran rhino parts are considered more potent and thus more valuable than African rhino horn, according to Philip Wells, who works for the International Rhino Foundation in helping Indonesia in organizing teams to stop the poachers. The teams, called Rhino Protection Units, conduct military-style sweeps of the jungle. These researchers see evidence of the poacher's technique.
This is the killing zone of the trap. There's the steel cable around the...
The snare is rigged to a tree and set to detonate when tripped by an unsuspecting rhino or any other creature that wanders into it.
This is a rhino-size log.
Once a rhino is trapped, any struggle to escape only tightens the noose. The animal can suffer for days before dying of its wounds or lack of water.
It will probably look as if a bomb has exploded as the animal struggles for as long as it has any energy left inside it to try and escape, and there'll be a crater here.
This deadly, inhumane device, more than any other cause, has brought the rhino to its knees. Hopefully, the anti-poaching teams can find and defuse more snares before the animals stumble upon them. In 1985, there were no such patrols, and rhinos were disappearing at the rate of 50 to 100 a year. If there was to be hope for the rhinos, if Torgamba was to be saved, something had to be done, and fast. For years, he had eluded both poachers and the prying eyes of scientists. Little did he know that now the fate of his kind would rest upon him. In the mid-1980s, scientists thought that some 800 to 1,000 Sumatran rhinos might still exist in the wild. Of those that still roam free, it was estimated that at least a fourth were condemned to die due to the loss of their habitat and poaching. Among them was Torgamba, then a young rhino roaming a secluded yet isolated tropical forest, soon to be cut down. In those days, there were no sanctuaries for Torgamba or any other Sumatran rhino. Nico van Strien, a leading Sumatran rhino field biologist, and his colleagues knew something had to be done. If the Sumatrans couldn't be protected, then why not rescue the most vulnerable, breed them in captivity, and someday release them in the wild? The Dutch scientists, however, knew it would be a challenge. Though Sumatran rhinos were among the first rhinos exhibited in zoos, only one had ever been bred in captivity, and that was a century before. This female, named Bagoom, pictured in 1899, resided at the London Zoo.
Well, there have been quite a number of Sumatran rhinos in captivity, but the majority didn't survive very long. And there was never any breeding, except in the very early stage of the movement of Sumatran rhinos into zoos, when there was a calf born in Calcutta Zoo at the end of the last century.
Still, the odds of success seem good, or at least better than the chances of the doomed rhinos surviving on their own. This rare historical film shows the teams of trackers that took to the Indonesian rainforest in May of 1985 to rescue Torgamba and the other doomed rhinos. Similar squads scoured the jungles of Peninsula Malaysia and Borneo. All were searching for the same thing. Rhino signs, like the horn scrapings found on this tree, kept them going, according to the International Rhino Foundation's Tom Foose.
There was a lot of optimism, hope and expectation in the early days that a captive propagation program for the Sumatran rhino could be successfully developed. We were reproducing 3 other species of rhinos in captivity, and so there was every reason to expect that we would be able to achieve the same kind of success with the Sumatran rhino.
Taking a lead from poachers, the next phase of the operation was to set a trap. The trick was to do it as safely as humanly possible. The traps were checked every day for 3 months, but the rhinos remained as elusive as ever. Then finally, one steamy morning in November, a young Sumatran rhino wandered down this path in the region of Torgamba, browsing for food. It was a male, approximately 4 years old, confused perhaps, but uninjured. Finally, scientists had their big break. This was their first glimpse of Torgamba, and the first time most of them had seen a Sumatran rhino. Since large mammals like rhinos don't tolerate heat well, a canopy of leaves was rigged to keep him cool from the 100-degree sun until he could be moved. Right from the start, they knew he was special. Torgamba proved how little the experts knew about the Sumatran rhinos. He was smaller and even hairier than they had expected. But the biggest surprise was how well he adjusted to his fate and the intense scrutiny. He was one of the shyest and most solitary creatures on Earth, yet adapted to captivity and humans as if it was the most natural thing on Earth.
It was very astonishing. Torgamba was extremely calm and settled as soon as he emerged from the pit into the corral. It really was phenomenal to observe how rapidly he adapted to a captive situation.
Once inside the camp's corral, Torgamba appeared to thrive in his temporary surroundings, basking in the attention. But other rhinos captured soon after were not so lucky. This one was in poor physical condition and suffered from a painful infection on its leg inflicted by a poacher's snare. Eventually, 40 Sumatran rhinos were captured, but the mission was not complete. Torgamba was the first Sumatran rhinoceros caught and the first to leave. So the plan was to send Torgamba more than 7,000 miles away, leaving behind the disappearing rainforests of Southeast Asia and the only home he's ever known. And the journey will not be his last. A few miles south of London in the English countryside is the Port Lympne Wild Animal Park. Established by British millionaire John Aspinall, the park is dedicated to saving endangered species by breeding them in captivity and releasing them in the wild. The park has been a proven success, as this rare black rhino and her calf can testify. Black rhinos flourished in Africa until poachers took aim, reducing their numbers from 65,000 in the 1970s to 3,000 today. A successful breeding program helped slow the decline. 20 black rhinos had been born here at Port Lympne alone. Scientists were convinced that if they could save the black rhino, they could save the Sumatran using the same techniques. Torgamba arrived here on April 4th, 1986. The stormy weather, a precursor of things to come. A world away from the steamy jungles of Indonesia, he took to his new home immediately, just as when first captured.
Hello, big fella.
In a spacious and specially designed enclosure, Torgamba displayed the playfulness and personality that would endear him to his keeper and soon-to-be constant companion, Martin Ellis.
He was very easy to be his friend, obviously. He's such a very sweet-natured animal, so you could play with him. He'd kind of chuck me about a bit, he'd throw me off his horn. He was really playful. He'd drag a log around the paddock and he'd chase it, and he'd throw this log around. So quite playful, quite young at heart.
As adaptable as he was to humans, there was little doubt he would also adjust to a mate once the perfect female was found. On the other side of the Atlantic, the rhinos appeared to make the transition with equal ease.
Come here. Cry baby. Cry baby. Cry baby.
Within weeks of arriving in the United States, this female, named Baracus, was already surprisingly enthusiastic and energetic. With her outgoing personality, Baracus formed a remarkable rapport with her attendant, seemingly at home right from the start.
They're really sweet. It's really nice.
But finding Baracus a mate proved to be more difficult than anyone expected. Between 1985 and 1995, 40 Sumatran rhinos were sent to 10 designated breeding centers at zoos in the United States, England, Indonesia, and Malaysia. Shortly after being caught, they were shipped off with the intention that a mate would soon follow. However, it was even more difficult than expected to capture equal numbers of males and females to form breeding pairs quickly. A problem that slowed the captive breeding program from the start. And no one could foresee that luck would also take a fateful turn. In England, Torgamba was one of the lucky ones, but not for long. A female sent to keep him company in 1986 died before Torgamba got to spend even one moment with her. Without a partner for Torgamba, there was no chance of breeding.
Obviously something had to be done, and it was going on and on and on. And I kept saying to Torgamba, you know, you're going to get a mate soon, we're going to get you sorted.
Confidence gave way to concern as word spread of problems cropping up in other breeding centers as well, such as this one in Borneo. While some ailments were more serious than others, the complications invariably undermined the breeding effort. Tanjung, a 10-year-old male encephalok, suffered from a painful foot infection linked to his mud hole. To ease Tanjung's discomfort and prevent the problem from spreading, the staff outfitted him with a makeshift pair of boots to help him get around. Until treated and cured, the chances of Tanjung breeding were remote. Some animals also began losing their eyesight, a direct result of being removed from the densely shaded jungle. Dusam, a female kept in an Indonesian zoo, developed cataracts from overexposure to the sun. While ointment helped reduce irritation and redness, scientists eventually concluded the best remedy was to shelter the creatures from too much sunlight. Most troublesome of all, rhinos in the breeding centers worldwide mysteriously began getting sick, this Malaysian zoo being no exception. In 1987, Jaram, a female, lost a potential partner when he abruptly died of unknown causes just 3 months after arriving here. That was only the beginning. Jaram, now one of the oldest surviving Sumatran rhinos in captivity, stood by as 2 more companions died as well, apparently from intestinal infections. In the United States, the kids, as Baracus and her male cohort came to be called, provided hope that they could produce the program's first calf. Yet in 1995, even they fell victim to an apparent intestinal disorder. Baracus and Tanjung died within just 4 days of each other. 2 of the world's rarest creatures, gone virtually overnight. In the United Kingdom, Torgamba was one of the few rhinos that was still as healthy and robust as ever. Yet he too was getting older, and he too was all alone, having outlived another female. A decade after Torgamba's arrival, his species' future was fading. The captured rhinos appeared as doomed in captivity as in the wild. Tom Foose and his team struggled to make sense of this anguishing turn of events.
A number of us were realizing that the conditions that we were providing in captivity just really wasn't conducive to the propagation program.
How had an animal that seemed initially to adapt so well to captivity begun to unravel just as quickly? Scientists suspected they would find the answer if they went back to the basics and took another look at the rhino's native habitat and its effect on the animals in the wild. The humid tropical habitat, so difficult to duplicate at a zoo, suddenly seemed more vital than previously realized. Though small compared to other rhinos, at just 4 feet in height and under a ton in weight, it's one of the largest herbivores in the tropical rainforest. A loner in the wild, the creature keeps completely to itself, marking its territory to warn potential intruders of its presence and to attract a companion during mating season. Despite its relatively poor eyesight and marginal hearing, the Sumatran rhino is remarkably stealthy, relying on a sharp sense of smell to detect danger, and capable of vanishing into the jungle at a speed of up to 30 miles per hour. Far more outspoken than its cousins, the Sumatran rhino has a wide variety of calls. Most active in early morning, evening, and night, this recluse spends much of the day in a cool mud hole called a wallow. Besides cooling off from the stifling equatorial heat, the muddy potion protects its sensitive skin against flies and other insects. When unable to bathe regularly in the soupy solution, the creature's skin cracks and gets inflamed. This can lead to fatal infections. But it's paid dividends as the animals gradually appeared to become healthier and happier as they settled in. Yet one of Turgamba's longtime advocates couldn't help but worry about his friend's progress. So a year after Turgamba's triumphant return to Sumatra, Peter Litchfield of Howlett's and Port Limb Animal Parks came to check up on the rhino's well-being.
Obviously, I've been very, very concerned all throughout the year.
Their reunion convinced Litchfield that Turgamba truly belonged back in his homeland and gave him new hope that Turgamba might yet achieve the breeding success so elusive in England.
He's greatly missed at home, and people are always asking about him.
I can well imagine.
Yeah. And obviously I feel quite responsible for him because he was sort of entrusted to me to bring here and basically ensure that he was going to be okay.
Well, hopefully there'll be some little Turgambas
Certainly hope so.
in the very near future.
Yeah, we'll be able to see that.
Sort of up to him now.
However, nature began to take its course elsewhere first, with a pair of rhinos at the Malaysian sanctuary. Dr. Zeinel had trouble keeping up with the quick courtship taking place between a pair of rhinos named Ara and Saputi.
I'm really looking at it very positively that mounting will occur in the next 12 hours.
Minutes later, the couple did indeed mate, just the second pair of rhinos to do so at the Malaysian sanctuary, and the first recorded on camera. Though the rhinos being bred at the sanctuaries have failed to produce any pregnancies yet, Dr. Zeinel and the other scientists believe they are on the right track. Ironically, the most promising results so far come from the only Sumatran rhino still being bred in a zoo, the Cincinnati Zoo, under the supervision of Dr. Terry Roth.
So far the behavior is what we want to see, because he's taking it slow and he's interested, so.
Hold your breath, Leslie.
She does this sometimes. She'll start cantering.
Emmy, an 8-year-old female, and Ipu, the male who almost died before a change in diet, hit it off right from the start, producing a pregnancy the second time they were put together.
Only Emmy.
It was the first confirmed pregnancy of a captive-bred Sumatran rhino in 108 years. Dr. Terry Roth was as proud as if she were expecting herself.
Yeah, I was doing the ultrasound exam on her, and I've had a lot of experience in ultrasound examination in horses. And this pregnancy looked exactly like what it looks like in a horse. So as soon as I saw it, I said, wow, she's pregnant.
Sadly, however, not pregnant for long. Despite the best care available, Emmy, who's now been pregnant 7 times, has only managed to sustain the fetuses for a few weeks, nowhere near the 16 months needed to deliver a calf. The last time was the most disappointing for Terry Roth and her team.
That was heartbreaking because we could see the fetus and we could see it move its limbs and the heartbeat. So that was tough. That was tough, and we don't know why she lost that one.
Despite the setback, Emmy's pregnancies led to a crucial biological breakthrough, which could explain the failure to breed Sumatran rhinos in captivity and lead to future success. For years, scientists assumed Sumatran rhinos should be kept apart, except when the female ovulates, because the male's aggressive behavior can actually endanger his partner. But during Emmy's pregnancies, Dr. Roth discovered Emmy ovulates only after breeding rather than before.
We measure those and watch them as they grow. And inside all those follicles, there are eggs. 7.0.
If Dr. Roth is right, to produce offspring, male and female Sumatran rhinos need to be allowed to spend much more time together, though with a chaperone to ensure the female's safety. That discovery goes a long way toward explaining why scientists have failed to reproduce Sumatran rhinos in captivity so far, and why they now believe it's only a matter of time until they do. If not, it could come down to this. breeding rhinos from genetic samples being preserved in cryogenic storage tanks. Hundreds of strands of frozen Sumatran rhino semen are stored in Cincinnati's frozen zoo. Someday, cloning may even be considered.
Most of the Sumatran rhino semen we keep in this tank. And we've got a lot in here. And theoretically, that will stay good for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Whether the first birth occurs in Cincinnati or Southeast Asia, scientists need to know more how they would behave and adapt before releasing any captive-born rhinos into the wild. That's why the historic footage taken with this remote camera positioned in the Sumatran jungle generated a lot of excitement. It took more than a year to record, the first footage ever taken of a wild Sumatran rhino. After a lifetime of trying, the International Rhino Foundation's Tom Foose finally got to see his first Sumatran rhino in the wild.
Oh, the video that you have of the Sumatran rhino in the wild is just phenomenal. I mean, my personal reaction is just ecstasy observing that animal. Any bit of information that we have about this species, of which we know so little, has value.
This rhino's location will remain undisclosed so as not to tip off poachers and jeopardize the creature's safety. The Sumatran rhino population, estimated to be at nearly 1,000 when Torgamba was captured, now has dwindled to 300. Habitat loss remains a deadly threat to its future. So do poachers, like this Indonesian man who was interrogated by anti-poaching units. In the last decade, he says 100 Sumatran rhinos were illegally poached in southwestern Sumatra alone. Yet Philip Wells and his teams have detected and destroyed dozens of rhino snares. Snares that might have meant another rhino lost forever. And the governments of Indonesia and Malaysia are doing more to catch and prosecute rhino killers.
This is incredible.
Still, when patrols uncovered dozens of lethal snares set to kill rhinos and other endangered species, the magnitude of what's at stake overwhelms even the most seasoned professional. But what will become of Torgamba? Protected in this Sumatran sanctuary, he appears destined to live a long life, perhaps to the age of 40. Whether Torgamba plays a role in perpetuating his species remains to be seen, but scientists are encouraged. Besides engaging in the rhino equivalent of foreplay, Torgamba and Bina have mated several times. Today, there are a few more answers than when Torgamba came on the scene, but also the same overriding questions.
Humans almost certainly caused the extinction of the woolly rhino. The efforts to conserve the Sumatran or hairy rhino are an attempt to prevent humans from committing that same crime against nature twice.
Will Torgamba and the other Sumatran rhinos go the way of their ancestors, the woolly rhino? Or will scientists pull this primitive species back from the brink of extinction? Time is running out.